Hi, my name is Zoey Toner. I'm a sophomore at Ashland High School. I was here earlier with Payshens Cinchy. She's a seventh grader at Ashland Middle School. We are both part of the Teen Press interview team. We were fortunate enough to speak earlier with some key subjects covered in the documentary film Youth v. Gov. We spoke with the film's producer, Olivia Ahneman, from her home in New Zealand, along with three of the film's subjects, Jacob L., Avery M., and Sahara V., from their homes in Oregon. Here is how it went. Hi. So the first question is, with the case at a stall right now, what impact have you seen in the climate change community with the whole case?
That's tough. I feel like, okay, at least from my view, like it seems like whenever we get decisions, everything ramps back up and gets super exciting and everyone gets super optimistic, and then there'll be like something thrown in our way and it'll kind of slow down a bit. Like it's definitely gone in like waves. I feel like any movement is going to have like waves of optimism and also less. And I think that it's kind of the same.
Mm-hmm. I think maybe in terms of impact, what I've seen is, I think there's a couple different things. There's an impact on the legal community, right, where there had never been a case like this before about the fundamental rights of young people, right? We don't, I mean, I'm of voting age now, but I think Sahara and Avery, I don't think you are yet. Most of the plaintiffs are not. So it was really a case about, you have these young people who are citizens, we're citizens of this country. We don't get to vote the leaders that make the decisions that are going to affect our future. And so that was kind of the crux of the case. And I think it was the first major case. It is the first major case of its kind. Now there's many cases like it across the world. There's one in Mexico, there's one in Canada, there's one in India, there's one in Pakistan that are led by young people. And so I think there's been this worldwide kind of movement of lawyers and nonprofits and young people coming together around this idea of the rights of young citizens to have a say in whether we'll get, more or less of a livable climate and ecosystem and resources to support our future lives. So I think that's, broadly speaking, one of the most important impacts. And then I think there's hopefully been a sort of inspiration part to this and a community building part to this, where young people have gotten inspired by our stories and our values and what we represent. And so hopefully there's been that aspect to it too. I think there has been, just from my personal experience with other youth and adults as well.
Yeah, I definitely think there has been that community impact. I think even, at the school that Avery and I go to, South Eugene High School, we have like an IHS program, and I've heard friends who are in that program talk about how they've learned about our case in school. And I think that's really cool that even schools are taking time to learn about this specific case.
Let's see. How did you guys feel sitting in the courtroom with Judge Eakins? No, exactly. Okay. When she asked her questions.
The honor of filming one of the court hearings at the Ninth Circuit Court in Portland. And it was the first time that I'd ever been in a federal court. And I was kind of blown away by the feeling of the weight of justice and what it felt like to be in that room, with the formality of it, and sitting in front of and being in the gallery and watching the lawyers argue the case and the judges come up with these very hard questions. And I feel like the lawyers are doing, like, pulling this information from their brain. That's amazing to think how much knowledge they have. And just looking around that courtroom and realizing, like, this is a third branch of our government. Like, this is an equal part of how things, laws, and change in our nation. And I was really blown away by it. I thought it was a fabulous experience, really.
And it's amazing feeling, especially adding on to that, like being a plaintiff, it's like you're getting your justice, even if nothing's happening, even if they're just talking about an old specific logistic in an old case, it's still like you're there and you're being heard, which is new.
And it was, yeah, I would add to that, it was definitely an experience every time we're in a courtroom. One that really strikes me is when we were before the Ninth Circuit in San Francisco. Yeah, I think San Francisco. And it was also kind of a heated hearing there. We had a judge who was particularly kind of aggressive with his questions to our lawyer, to Julia, and you know, so that there's definitely that kind of stress, but also just kind of chills just being in that in the courts, all the decorations and the symbolism. I mean, the courts at their best represent our moral values as society, as human beings, right? Animals don't really have courts, and you know, it's something that's unique to our society, to humans, and it's really based on our moral values. And so I think to more or less of an extent, hopefully those judges and the courts and the symbolism there kind of represent those values. And so it's definitely kind of always an experience to be sitting in those courtrooms. And last point, something that really struck me, I'd never been inside a courtroom before and before a judge. The judges really ask, like, it can get really tangled in like these legal words and these old cases and everything, but the judges will pull out these really kind of simple questions and these really, maybe simple is not the right word, but these really kind of, they make up these scenarios that are really understandable to anybody. And they try to use that to say, okay, does this make sense? And I really enjoyed that. And you can find the footage, some footage in the movie, but also online. There's a couple different places you can find, some places that they allowed video, and you can also find transcripts. And it's just really neat to see those ideas just get teased out by the judges and the attorneys. And I found it really interesting and educational.
Yeah,
I can add on really quickly just about how I felt sitting in on hearings. I always feel really proud about our lawyers. They're always so put together. And usually Julia ends on like sometimes a quote or something that totally wraps it together. But oftentimes I can get really like peeved by the defendants, and usually Avery and I are sitting next to each other. So we have a notebook and we'll like write to each other on the notebook or whatever to try to like, you know, get out our feelings or whatever, or we'll like squeeze each other's hand. So it's really nice to have the plaintiffs sitting next to you just as support, you know, throughout that whole thing.
Where do you guys all find your confidence?
Confidence.
Yeah.
You kind of get the help you need kind of on the way, and you know, you kind of grow as a person and as a human being through it.
Yeah.
I think experience too. Like I used to be so nervous, and like the press like genuinely scared me. Like I was scared when they would come out and we'd be outside of the courthouse. I'd be like, crap, they're here. But it's not like I just did it. I was like, okay, I guess I'm just gonna go do an interview. And they didn't always air them and it wasn't always great. But after I did it enough times, I was like, okay, this isn't actually that bad. Like you just kind of like get used to it, I feel like, after a bit, which sounds so weird, but like, yeah.
And I think we've been shown many times how much support we have, not only in Eugene, which is where the case is based, but also across the US and even in other parts of the world. We've been shown so much love and support that I think that really helps us all feel empowered.
I'm super impressed by all of you guys and plaintiffs. And I think about myself in middle school and high school, and like my friends, we weren't doing interviews and being part of like a case. And I would say, like, from an adult's point of view and just seeing like the youth movement on a bunch of issues like really grow over the last couple of years, it's super inspiring. And I think I don't know if it was that we just didn't have the things to feel like we needed to fight for when I was your age, but it's amazing to watch, and the confidence that you three have and all of your fellow plaintiffs is awesome.
What happens when you encounter climate change deniers? Do they have like a strong, do they have evidence at all, or do they feel like they have evidence?
I mean, there's people that believe in climate change but don't believe the case is going to do anything, or believe that the courts are the wrong way. Going through the courts is the wrong way to approach it, and that's fine. Like, they can think that. And I mean, they might have evidence. It's not good evidence. It's not proven evidence, but they have some sort of evidence in their mind that climate change is a hoax. And I mean, apart from educating the people we can educate, it's kind of hard to like switch someone from that super tense, extra kind of view of the world. It's hard to kind of bring them down from that place. I've noticed a lot. I mean, even when I was like 9, there was this post about the lawsuit featuring me, and this one kid was like, or this one guy was like, oh, so cute, you think you have a voice, now go play with your Barbies. And like, you know, like there's always gonna be people that say stuff like that, and it's just not worth your time to actually pay attention to them, as rude as that sounds, but that's just been my experience.
You got to keep your mind on the positive.
Yep. Connecting it to people's individual needs and individual harms that they're feeling from climate change, and pointing out that the government isn't helping them, I think is definitely one way to like get through to those people.
These people are not monochromatic. Every individual is different. It's not black and white. They're often people that are, not always, but they can be people that are very in touch with nature, and very appreciative of wild places and animals. And you know, they're often farmers and ranchers and loggers and foresters. So there's a large range, and I just try to treat every person as an individual and as a human being, first and foremost, and that opens communication a lot more.
What are your thoughts on the EPA? How did you react to Trump's destruction of all this protection?
It's hard because it's really easy to look at Trump and say, he's the boogeyman, he did all this bad stuff, he's the reason that we're in this awful place with the climate. And it's just not true. Like, we've had this problem for 60 plus years, and there's been presidents for 60 plus years and administrations that have been making climate change worse. So like, yes, he created a lot of problems and definitely messed us up a bit, and it's not all his fault, and there's been a lot of administrations that are responsible for where we are right now.
I mean, I think I totally agree with what Avery says, especially in terms of climate change. I mean, I think it was definitely kind of really over the top, like cartoonish Disney villain, kind of, you know, over the top in terms of environmental damage and on climate change, but also just some basic like pollution standards and things that are even more like just related to immediate environmental toxicity and harm to wild creatures and ecosystems. So it was definitely disheartening, even with all that we know about the history of the US, to see that just being kind of put out in plain sight. At the same time, you know, it's kind of like, you know what you're fighting, you know what you're dealing with. So,
you know, climate change really shouldn't be a political issue. It's something that's affecting people across political lines. And we, as a country, I think, need to wrap our heads around that pretty quickly. And I think having someone like Trump in office, where throwing sort of fuel on the fire and everybody digging into their trench deeper, we're just losing valuable time on solving this issue that's going to have a real impact on all of our lives. So to me, that's where the damage comes in, is people getting deeper into their, you know, belief system or the evidence they choose to understand or look at. And I think there needs to be some way to, I don't know, take it out of the political sphere, I guess, and realize that it's a problem we all have to solve.
It really needs to be anti-politicized. I don't know how else to
Yeah,
say it.
yeah, exactly.
Yes, it's probably the main reason that I'm in this case and devoting my time and energy to the environmental movement is not just I find it's incredibly important, but I also work on a family farm and I try to do practical things to help combat climate change in the environment. But part of the reason that I'm doing this activism, I feel like, is because I think it's actually a point where we can bring people together and we can unify whatever family or culture or belief system or tradition that you come from, even around the world. It's really kind of the challenge of our age to fix our environmental issues, our relationship with our environment and ecosystems. And the main aspect of that is climate change. That's kind of the biggest issue, the biggest impact we're having on the planet as a whole. And so that's kind of what motivates me the most, is that whoever I talk to, I want to bring it to that point where we can agree on that basic value.
And I think it's important to note that while we were suing the the Trump administration, it started off the Obama administration and now it's the Biden administration. So it was never just the Trump. Obviously it was throughout the whole Trump administration, so sometimes that can get confusing. But all of the administrations have been actively contributing to climate change.
Why do you think it is so politicized?
Because when politicians can blame another party or another group of people for the problems that we're all going to have to fix, it's easier. And when you think about it, like, both Democratic political members and Republican political members are backed by oil. Like, it's one of those things where, like, it's very easy to point fingers, and that's what everybody's doing. They're saying, oh, it's the Republicans, oh, it's the Democrats and this green energy, oh, it's the Republicans and their oil, and like, we just have to stop with that whole mentality. It's not useful.
Yeah, maybe if I can add to that briefly, I thought a lot about this subject. I don't know that I came to a very distinct answer. It's a big topic. It's the main problem that we're facing. Well, we haven't made progress for over 60 years. And what I came to is that I think our politicians tend to kind of take the easy route of saying, because look, there are people who depend on oil and gas, and there are people that have, Alaska, we have Nathan who's from Alaska. Alaska's industries are largely dependent on oil and coal and gas and fossil fuels, and people's families depend on that. So there are people that will vote for people that support those industries. And so politicians like Justin Trudeau of Canada, I'm originally from Quebec, I'm an immigrant from Quebec and now a US citizen. So in Canada, Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister, is at the forefront of climate policies and the Paris Climate Agreement, all of that. And yet he's supporting the Keystone Pipeline. And, I've asked often what I would say to him or to President Obama when he was president, or to political leaders. And I always come back to the point that I think our politicians in this space and time, you don't only need to represent the people, you also need to educate them and be leaders. And the other side of this is that there's also a whole bunch of youth and young people who are not eligible to vote in this country. And we're a huge block of citizens of this country that are not getting represented. And so they have no political incentive to make decisions based on us, on our interests and our needs and what we're looking at and our values.
Oregon faces the increased chances of wildfires, also depletion of coastal fisheries. Is lowering greenhouse gases do enough?
Well, can I speak to the wildfire part of that?
Yeah.
Yes, lowering greenhouse gases would certainly help with moisture and drought cycles, but also forest management is really important with wildfires too. So allowing natural wildfires to burn rather than suppressing all fires is something that needs to change in our approach to forest management.
Yeah, I don't remember where, I think it might have been the UN. I don't remember what it was, but I think it's like 8 or 10 years until our climate fates are sealed, which is why it's, that's not a lot of time at all. That is like no time. So it's really important that we're all doing as much as we can right now, because like Jacob said, it's a much smaller scale time-wise, much smaller turnaround.
Okay, so how do you think COVID has affected the climate change movement?
I think for movements, it's kind of funny for me because I didn't consider myself like an activist. I mean, like going to rallies and talking to the press, and I mean, I was a farm boy, and I decided to get involved because of this pipeline project, and it kind of took me on this journey. But so when the pandemic hit, I was extremely lucky that I basically had a 600 acre ranch that had a lot of work to be done on organic farming and taking care of animals, and so I had my hands full, and my daily life didn't change that much, and I felt like I was still doing something like that was in line with my values, and I had other people to share it with, so that was a huge blessing. But it's definitely really hard, especially for people in town and like where you don't have that direct kind of feedback, and where you rely on being with other people that share your values, and you can't do that anymore except over Zoom, and it's really hard. So I kind of just shift my focus to that, more focusing on that practical day-to-day work aspect and tying it into my activism and values, but more to day-to-day work.
I think another thing real quick is that like when you were talking about like government's place, it's very hard to see COVID, right? Because it's hit so many families and it's been really, really challenging. And it's pretty amazing how quickly we were able to get things under control. Like we were able to pour in large amounts of money that I didn't know this country even had into getting a vaccine created and rolled out, and getting people supplies and masks and tests. And it just shows that we have the ability. Like we right now, if Biden right now was like, this is a national emergency and we need to put all our funds towards it, we could turn it around. Like we can do it. It's not out of reach.
Yeah.
We just have to put our brains to it and actually make politicians think that it's a big enough deal. So.
Yeah.
True. I think on the other part of the question about how has COVID and sort of like a global economic slowdown impacted the actual climate, I think the data is not in on that yet, and it will probably become more apparent over time as people analyze different sets of data and evidence. People do from a from just personal observations, have noticed, or at times during this year and a half of COVID, have noticed that their, air has been clearer as factories have slowed down, or not as many cars have been driven, and animals have started coming back into other, places as human activity has slowed down, or people are in their homes more. But I have no idea if that's going to be long lasting, or what the conclusion will be in the long run. So I think we have to wait and see on that part of the question. It's a great question though. I'd be really, really interested to see that those analysis come in.
And what I've seen just from preliminary studies is that our main industries, like people still need electricity to power their houses. So the main thing is like transportation, air travel, and car travel went down a lot, but still needs massive amount of electricity, power our computers, our Zoom calls, our houses. We still are using stuff. There's still a lot of manufacturing going on, and those are the kind of the heavy hitters, and they still kept going. So I think the preliminary studies are saying the problem still kept increasing, maybe some slowdown. And it's also kind of odd, right? Because if you're like, sometimes people are like, there's this part that's kind of celebrating, right? That the animals are coming back, human activities going down in some areas. But at the same time, it's kind of a negative way to do it. It's like we're shut inside and we're dealing with all these negative things, and that can create a backlash in our spirits and people's minds. And for me, it's like, look, if we don't do it the right way, this is what happens. But the right way is to build a smart interface with nature where we're both benefiting, where, animals and ecosystems are benefiting and being improved by humans being there. And we have this synergic relationship, and we're not like a cancer that just grows and harms everything. It needs to be something where both, where everybody kind of benefits.
Okay, so what can kids do? Because it seems like the climate movement is mainly with kids. So what can kids do to help besides getting involved politically like you all did?
I mean, so there's like join a lawsuit, right? And then there's like writing representatives, writing senators, trying to get your elected leaders to do their jobs correctly. And I think that that's a really amazing thing that you can do, because writing letters is super easy and it goes straight to someone's mailbox, and hopefully they will get it and be like, oh, maybe I should change. So I think that's a really good thing. At least in Eugene, we have like Zoom city council meetings, and I think that going to city council meetings and advocating for bills or legislations that could help climate change, what am I trying to say, like help with climate change in your own town. This is what I'm trying to say. I think like local actions are really important too. So
I just feel like every person needs to find, and it's sometimes not even directly related to climate change or the environment. And I really encourage people to write letters and go to rallies and do everything that you can, politically and in your town. But there's also like those unique things that just you find on your life path where it's like, this is something that I care about and that I'm involved with. And you just don't, like, if there's no recycling, it's a really kind of stupid, easy one, but it's just kind of, sometimes you're like, why is there no recycling? Like, there's no more recycling in my town. And then you decide you take it on, and you just kind of write letters and research and do everything you can, and you just figure out, and you don't stop until you just don't stop, and you go all the way up to the Supreme Court like we did. If there's, and that's the kind of attitude I think that gets us somewhere, that we need. So whatever it is, I think that's just kind of something that I found works, but it's kind of unique to every individual.
And I would just add too, don't be afraid to ask the adults in your life too for the support where you need it. Adults have maybe more network. They can connect you with people, financial resources that they can help, seed ideas. I think in some cases, adults feel like, oh, great, there's this youth movement. We don't have to do anything, but that's not true at all. We have kind of got us all into this pickle. And I think it's our job now as young people start stepping up and getting inspired to take action on issues like climate change, that one of our jobs is to help support that, besides all the other things we need to be doing. But I think that's one of them.
Really grateful that I got to meet with you guys today and kind of learn more about all this climate change stuff that you guys are doing for us.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Likewise.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure meeting everyone and seeing you, Avery and Jacob. Thank you, Christopher, and to the Teen Press team. So we'll see you at the festival.